So Dale, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. I thought what I'd do in the time allotted is give you a bit of a crash course in media training. I can't tell you everything about the media in just a few short minutes, but at least I think I can trigger a bit of a conversation, answer some questions, and kick around some ideas when it comes to the media and what it's all about. I want to boil the conversation today down into these three essential messages: how to understand the media, how to deal with the media, and how to use the media to get your message out, because of course that's the point. That's what we want to do. We want to be able to use the media for the benefit of our issues and our movement around the world. Easier said than done, as I'm sure many of you already know. First, a bit about the media and how to understand it and how to deal with them if you have not had that opportunity to really deal with the media. They're broken down into several job functions, from researchers, reporters, columnists, personalities, as some people call themselves, and editors and producers. Where you access this group of people means that you will have to have slightly different approaches to what you're saying. If you're sending out a simple press release and it's being emailed to the editor of a program or the editor of a newspaper or the producer of some television show that you would like to get on, well then fine, go ahead. The other thing to remember about this group of people is that they're just people, just like all of us, and that some of them will have different approaches towards what they're doing. The old adage in media is that the online reporters are essentially covering the news. They are not meant or designed particularly to have an opinion or a slant on a story or an interpretation on a story. They are the people who grind out, and that's what journalists call it, grinding out the daily news. But if you're dealing with a columnist on a newspaper, for example, something to remember there is the columnist may have some special knowledge of medical issues, in particular dementia issues, and your sell or your pitch to them will be somewhat easier. To find those people is very important, and get them as much as you can on their side. Dealing with personalities, well, that can be both good and bad, depending upon how much opinion that the personality might bring to the interview. If essentially you're being interviewed by somebody for television or radio, you want to be able to get that message out, but if the person who's conducting the interview, A, really doesn't know much about dementia, or B, is much more interested in forwarding his or her own ideas in the interview, it'll be a tougher slog. Editors and producers, from my point of view, is a good way to get to broadcast programming and print program and print publicity as well, because if you have the boss sensitized to what the issues are, he or she is more likely to send somebody out or assign somebody to do the story. So dealing with the media, let's go back and talk a bit about that. If the media is approaching you, it's very important for you to ask, well, why do you want to talk to me? And is this an interview, a broadcast interview? Is this an interview over the telephone for a newspaper quote? And how will that interview be used? Is it part of a larger program? Is it part of a series, or is it straight news? You need to know that as the interview subject, so you know best how to approach your time, either in front of the microphone or in front of the camera, or just talking on the telephone to a producer. The other thing that's important to know, especially in this day and age, a lot of material on radio and television is live. The old notion of recording things is pretty well gone, simply because the capability is there now to do it live. So a live situation shouldn't make you any more nervous or apprehensive. I'm not saying that, but the good thing about a live interview is they can't edit you. And that's very important. To get your message, you're asked a question, and I'll tell you in a moment how best to get into what your messaging is while at the same time answering the question. So if someone is saying to you, a producer is saying to you, we want you to come on a show and do something live, or we'll talk to you over the phone live, or a mobile video crew will come to where you are and talk to you, consider the live an advantage, because it's unfiltered to a greater degree than if they record it and then later chop it up into little pieces and miss the point of what you were trying to say in the first place. If it's a mobile crew, they'll probably want to stand you up and interview you like this. Some, if it's for a program, will sit you down. I can tell you from many years of experience that the better interview is the stand-up. It's more personal because the interviewer is right there, and he may or she may be just passing the microphone back and forth, which is just fine, and you should not feel apprehensive about that as opposed to a sit-down. Sit-downs don't tend to work as well. When you're sitting down and presenting yourself to a camera, there's a certain posture that you would have to read up about to make sure that you're doing it properly, so you don't look disinterested, you don't look like you're involved in the project. There aren't as many of those going around now as there are the stand-up live interviews, and they're the ones that really you want to do. And you'll get to say, don't forget that. I mean, the media will accommodate you to a certain extent. If you say, no, I'd rather stand up, why don't we stand up here? 9 times out of 10, the interviewer is going to say, okay, that's fine, we'll set it up over here. Journalists prefer that kind of stand-up situation anyway because it looks more urgent. It looks more engaged. It looks live as opposed to a kind of sit-down situation. Why do they want to talk to you? Let's talk about dealing with the media. If they have come to you, you need to know why. As I said a few moments ago, what's the subject material? What kinds of questions will you be asking me? Don't say what questions you'll be asking me, because that turns off every journalist I've ever known. I'll do the questions. The journalist is saying, I'm not going to give you the questions. But you can certainly talk about the nature of the questions or the nature of the conversation that you want to have. And you also want to know, if it isn't live, what kind of a program it's going to go into. What essentially what is the final product going to look like? You're well within your rights of asking exactly that. Because it's your reputation and your words, they're on the line as you speak on behalf of your local association or society. Interviews in a studio, they can be fine. I'll tell you one little tip about an interview in a studio. Usually you're talking to a journalist who is the host of a program, and it's a general, say, a current affairs program where the host is pummeled every day with tons and tons and tons of different information on different subjects. That person might not know, there are exceptions, might not know as much background information about dementia as you would like him to know. So if you're dealing with someone like that and you suddenly realize from the questions you're really going back to basics, well, go back to basics with the interviewer, because that's the way you're going to have to do it, especially if it's live. Go back. And if you're asked a stupid question, and this does happen, if you're asked a stupid question, answer it, but get on with your own message in a nice segue flowing kind of style. Because if you don't answer the question, the very first thing a good journalist is going to say is they'll interrupt you. You don't want to be interrupted, but they'll interrupt you. They'll interrupt you anyway, so don't worry about that. They'll interrupt you and say, "You're not answering my question." Because the journalist wants to formulate the interview in a certain way. She has things to open with, things in the middle. She may have written out questions as well, who knows? It doesn't really matter as far as you're concerned. It only matters that that message that you've already thought about, using some of the information and advice that Anastasia gave us just a few moments ago, to formulate that key message, the so-called elevator pitch. You're with the health minister going from the ground floor to the 9th floor. Well, you've got, 30 seconds. There's your elevator pitch. How can you engage that person? Same kind of thing when you're doing a media interview. The other thing to remember, and this doesn't, I put a little blue addition at the bottom there saying you can always say no. It may seem antithetical to the purpose of what you want. You want to be in front of the media, but there may be occasions, and it does happen, when you don't necessarily, they've come to you, and it may be something that's a difficult subject, it may be controversial for some reason or another. You have to sit down with your colleagues and decide whether or not, in fact, you want to be interviewed. It's your right. You get to say if you want to talk to the media or if you don't want to talk to the media. Don't think that there is some built-in responsibility for you to talk to the media. A good alternative, if it's, boy, this thing is sensitive, isn't it? A good alternative is, if it's a difficult subject, and most journalists will accept this, send an email. Say, no, I don't wish to be interviewed on this, but here is our point of view. That point of view will be quoted as part of that story. So you still did get your message out. If, in fact, you don't want to be criticized or attacked in some way by the journalist who may be asking you to answer a difficult question. So how do you use the media? Which is 98% of the situation as far as I'm concerned. It's not the media coming to you, it's you getting to the media, really. That's the larger part of this. Approaching the media, how do you do it? Well, one of the first ways you can do it, and somebody mentioned this earlier, social media. Don't forget social media. Everybody has, or most people have, one of these things in their pocket. That's your own radio station, that's your own TV station, that's your own newspaper right there. And how much does it cost you to run those things? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Study up on it if you're not totally studied up on it. It changes all the time. The technology gets better and better, and your ability to be able to get your message out unfiltered, as Donald Trump would say, he loves unfiltered, get your message out without anybody interrupting you. There it is. Now, how that figures into the mainstream media is the fact that guess who's monitoring social media? The main media. They do it all the time. They're on Twitter figuring out what stories they're going to cover. Or they're checking out a Facebook post from somebody, or a Facebook Live interview that somebody has conducted, again, for no money. Just get somebody to ask you questions and post it on your Facebook page. Post it on YouTube, for crying out loud. What does that cost? Well, let me think. Nothing. Nothing. And by doing that, you may not, all by itself, that may not change much. But what it does, it gets the attention of the mainstream media. Then the mainstream media moves in, and then you've really made some progress. How to sell them on your story? Well, gee, if there was anything more compelling than this story, I don't know what it is. 50 million people in the world with it right now? trillion-dollar disease by next year, $1 trillion US, that's the cost of dementia. A new case every 3 seconds somewhere in the world. Granted, many members of the media do not fully understand dementia. They don't understand it at all. And so part of your job is to, as best you can, educate them. The same way that you and all of us are educating the general public about dementia, because it is not still, despite all of the awareness campaigns, despite all of the coverage, the overall understanding and appreciation of what an urgent health situation this is not yet gotten home to regular people who read a newspaper, turn on the radio, or watch TV. And until they are totally engaged, generally speaking, the politicians aren't going to do much. I agree with the health minister in Costa Rica. You know, the squeaking wheel gets the most grease, is what we say in Canada, and it's very true from a journalist's point of view. If you do that, you will cause the governments to move. The governments on their own don't often move. They are not proactive, they're reactive. What are they reacting to? Us. Us. We've got it. It's right there. There's your radio station, your TV station. Your key to getting on the media. And bigger media. That story can grow from a single Twitter post or a series of Twitter posts by a number of people, can cause motion and cause coverage to happen. The technique of, and journalism schools spend a long time on this, how to get somebody to answer the question. That's the point of view of the journalist. Why won't they answer my questions? Ask any journalist in Washington how often they get an answer to a question. Not very often. The only thing I can say is repeat what I said a few moments ago. Answer the question, but take it somewhere else. And if you answer the question, immediately the journalist will either be surprised because you answer the question. There's so much spinning going on today when a journalist puts a microphone in front of somebody, you wonder if you're ever going to get the answer. It's become so endemic that most journalists really don't expect an answer to the question. They expect a long spin of some kind, and they'll try to turn that around and bring it back to what they wanted to talk about. So the very first thing you do, if you answer the question, you'll set the interviewer back a bit, and while the interviewer is thinking, oh my God, I got an answer to my question, you go on with your elevator pitch a bit. But you know, Bob, the really important thing to remember about this is what an incredible urgent health situation this is. It could threaten to bankrupt healthcare systems in many countries around the world, and here too, anywhere. And if you say that with enough emotion and clearly and concisely, the journalist then is liable to take you up on that. So here the journalist came in with one agenda, and you've changed it around a bit. Now the journalist wants to know more about what you just said because it's that urgent, meaningful message. The journalist will struggle and get control again of the interview later on. Don't worry about that. That's going to happen anyway. You just make sure that every time you're asked some boneheaded question, if it is boneheaded, don't say it's boneheaded. By the same token, don't say that's a good question. When you say that's a good question to an interviewer, he's thinking, oh, that's a question he wanted me to ask, right? Oh, that's a very good question, how great I am. Well, I can tell you about that, you know? So don't compliment the journalist on it being a good question. Just answer the question plainly and simply. and hopefully enough of that message will. That would work if it's a recorded interview in a mobile situation, or just a newspaper interview over the phone. Works pretty well for anything. You've probably asked yourself this. Lots of people do these days, I think. Can you trust the media? What do you think offhand? Can you trust the media? Huh? Well, here's my answer. Maybe. And here's why I say that. I mean, there are bad journalists out there. There's no doubt about that. There are many more good journalists than bad journalists. But remember, they come at the whole art of communications in an entirely different way. They are the purveyors of information to get it out to their public. Newspaper, radio, television, whatever it is. And you're trying to get your message out. Well, if you only got your message out without the journalists asking questions, that's called advertising. And you're supposed to pay for that. So that's why those cross purposes exist. You want that message to get out. You want people to understand the emotion and the seriousness of what you have to say about the fight against dementia. The journalist may just be interviewing his fourth or fifth interview subject that day from, to send back to the newsroom, and isn't quite as engaged. So that's why I say maybe. Here's another question. Is the media your friend? Huh? Are they your friend? I mean, there's a relationship there, isn't there? There's a kind of back and forth relationship that does exist. The media needs you people to tell stories. You need media to repeat the stories. I would say not likely. Again, because of the cross purposes in the profession. They aren't out to make you look great, or bad for that matter, although some will try. Their job is to get out the information. Whether they interpret the information before it actually gets to air is something else entirely different from that. But they can't be your friend. Journalists are taught in university, journalism is its own very special profession. Much maligned these days, if you're in Washington, you know. But it's his own very special profession. And their job is to cover the news, interpret the news, and go into depth on certain news items. Or in some cases, be an advocacy journalist. There are some of those around. I spent 48 years doing that. But so they don't come at it from the same point of view at all. It doesn't mean you can't get along with the media, and it doesn't mean you can't develop your own media sources or have yourself be the source for some media outlet. It doesn't hurt to try to get those key people, influential people, some of them may be, in your community, on your side. At least on your side enough to listen to your story. And what is that story you're telling beyond the elevator pitch that Anastasia's talking about? It's stories about people. People make the news. They really do. And a journalist will always go for some story which is for many reasons compelling. And I can't think of many stories that are as compelling as some of the stories about dementia. How they affect the whole family, how they can affect, well, I don't have to tell you these things, you know these things already. Those are the kinds of things that journalists will always pay attention to. Sure, reports are good. Some pronouncement on latest research that has a tiny, tiny hope of being something 10 years down the road, those are all good too. But a compelling personal story is really how you're going to get attention from the media. Now, I'm leaving a little time here because I'm hoping you're going to have some questions or some comments about what I'm talking about, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on my thoughts and whether or not any of these things have worked for you, or do you think they could work for you? Who's going to be brave? All right, Mark?
Mine is actually a question.
Yeah.
How quickly should you get a press release out? Say something happened today, and I don't get it to the media until next week.
Well, then it's gone.
It's gone.
It's
Okay.
gone. If you're going to react to something in the media, especially in today's media, which is a 24-hour operation, you have got to do it immediately. You will impress media types if you do react immediately. Now, sometimes I know that's difficult. Maybe you can't get it together. Maybe you have to talk to your colleagues. But if you wait till next week, it's gone.
Yeah, okay. Because I've seen that, not in our case, but I've seen that happen, like a training happened last week at the university, and we don't see it until 2 or 3 weeks in the papers. So it has a date, like, I'm not interested in reading it because I've already heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, the newspapers will probably print it, but broadcast media, no, you won't get. And remember, you can also react on Twitter.
Right, yeah.
How many of you know how to use Twitter?
Yeah.
Are you tweeters? How many tweeters here? It's so easy. I can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Sign up. What does it cost to sign up? Nothing. What does it cost to send a message? Nothing. There's a whole litany of zeros. But the effectiveness is there. You build your presence with Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the big TV in the sky, YouTube. An awful lot of journalists watch YouTube all day long looking for stories.
Oh, okay.
And even if it isn't another journalist, it's somebody else saying, oh, I could add something, I could put up something that would be a reaction in some way to that YouTube video that I just saw. And that's how you build momentum in a story, in a set of issues that are important to us.
Okay, was one other comment I was going to say, when we're going on to radio, TV, or whatever, what I usually do is make a list of questions that I want them to ask me.
Well,
Because I want my message, I don't want it to be filled with all their chit-chat.
Yeah.
So this is my list of questions, and I always say, please don't ask me any medical question. I am not a medical person because I realize that a lot of the media people have those.
I know. Every time I did a television show or a radio show about dementia, of which I've done many, I always know that one of my guests had to be a doctor, because most of the questions will be compelling. But don't worry about, don't tell that to the host beforehand. You can if you want, but don't make a big deal out of it, because if they ask you a medical question, you'll say, I can't answer that. Then they'll stop asking for sure, because they don't want answers like that just kind of slow down the interviewer. In terms of having your focus point, your questions written out, there's nothing that says you can't, as long as they're really in point form so you don't sound like you're reading something off a page. Because, Oh, no, don't give it to them. If you gave that to me, I'd throw it away. Well, that might be a question of size. I don't know. I just think that's a bad habit to get into. Don't be feeding the media questions, for crying out loud. Let them figure it out for themselves as best they. You could be subtle about it. You can say, in a little conversation before the interview starts, you can always say, the really important things to remember here, blah blah blah. But I wouldn't be handing them anything.
What I do in my experience is that what I normally do is I would send them a whole set of information on what I want them to ask about, for general information and stuff like that, so that they could extrapolate questions from the article that I would be thinking to answer.
Well, then that's called,
give them a background information.
Then that's called background.
Yes.
So then once you've made the connection and you're about to be interviewed by a show or a journalist, you email them background information. Much appreciated, but just email the background. Don't tell them, don't give them questions. I'm sorry.
What we've experienced, especially since we do a lot of sit-down discussions, and they're live, is that the moderator always asks us, in advance, let me know the points that you want to cover.
Oh, well, that's nice.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. And this way, we write it down, send it to them in an email, and they cover those points, and we're ready for those points.
Well, those
and
are
that's really
okay.
focusing.
But those are sweetheart situations.
Yeah.
It isn't always like that.
We do have some sweetheart situations in the BVI.
Well, it's good because
Yeah.
you garner those relationships
Yes.
with some members of the media.
Yes.
And hey, listen, I'm only giving you worst case scenario here. If you found something that works and if you hand out questions and they ask them, well, carry on.
Right.
The bottom line is to get the message out.
Right. Even in terms of getting the message out about the adoption of the World Health Organization, the strategy plan, the global strategy plan, when I contacted one of our news or print media, he said to me, well, you're going to a conference. He knew I was going to a conference. What you do, go to the conference, and when you come back, I'll have a journalist meet with you and your PS and someone else, and we'll have an interview. I mean, we've got sweetheart situations.
But that's good journalistic practice. They want a person from the conference. They don't need to get out the fact that the World Health Assembly 11 or 12 days ago passed this thing. In fact, the news of its passing was incredibly underwhelming for the world media, I can tell you right now. It didn't really, it's vitally important to us, and it's still important because in a digitized world, that report stays and is available to the media. Even when they do a story 3 weeks from now, they can go back and quote something that happened with the World Health Assembly. Was somebody over here?
Hello.
Hi.
I note your observation about people making the news, and I'm particularly interested in that, but I'm always kind of worried about how people are used in the news, how their stories are told. I'm always a little bit worried about that.
Well, yeah, I understand that because I see people being used by the media every day. So do all of us. We see that. An accident victim or some tragedy and somebody sticks a microphone in a grieving mother's face and says, how do you feel? Well, how do you think the person feels? There's risk in it, but there's also a huge and important message to be delivered if, for example, someone with dementia is interviewed with a friend, there's somebody to help, in a certain situation, depending upon the journalist involved. There's an occasion where you might be presented with something like that, an offer from the media, and you might have to think very seriously about whether or not you want to follow through with it or say, well, no thanks, I can come on or whatever, but we're trying to guard the dignity and have respect for those who are living with dementia. And not every journalist is going to necessarily feel that way, although when you can get somebody with dementia to talk about dementia, you have your hands exactly a very powerful message. At the ADI conference in Kyoto, we had 200 of our delegates were people with dementia, of which 30 were presenters at the conference. They were presenters. They were front and center. We were hearing from the real experts, the people living with dementia.
Can I ask a question, Dale?
Sure.
I had my most terrible interview a few weeks ago when Al Jazeera called and they said, we want to interview you. We have done some research. We have filmed people in Indonesia and we want to talk about the differences between high-income countries and lower and middle-income countries. And I was in the Netherlands that day and they wanted to interview me directly in the next few hours.
Yeah.
So they booked a studio in Amsterdam and he said, you go there and then we talk to you.
A double-ender, as we call it.
Yeah. And what happened was that I was in a small room with a camera like this, a black camera.
That's all you got.
So I was watching the camera. I didn't see any person. I got an earphone.
Yeah.
And someone in my ear asked me the questions.
Yeah.
And I didn't see his reaction. It was a very weird. And then they published it on a screen, and they had me with the background of Amsterdam.
Yeah, you're in a box somewhere. Yeah.
But you don't know how to behave. Is there anything you can do?
Well, what you do is you do what a television journalist does. When I'm a journalist in a room talking to the camera, that's my audience. that lens, and I'm not staring, but I'm looking and addressing that lens. That's all I've got. You're right, you get no body language information coming back, no expressions, no frowns, no smiles, so you really don't know how to conduct yourself. It's not, double-enders, I tell you, they work for the media, they don't work for the people who are on the other end of a double-ender. They really don't. The better situation, rather than a broadcast double-ender in which you're just sitting in a little room, is a Skype interview or a Zoom interview.
Yeah.
Zoom is better quality, my thought. Because with the Zoom thing, you can see the person. You know, I predict that in time to come, these double-enders will disappear. Why? Well, they're expensive. And let's go back. What does the Zoom thing cost? Nothing. Doesn't cost. It costs the media company about $100 a year, a kind of token payment to do this kind of thing. So when somebody says if you say double-ender, you'll have to think twice about whether or not you want to do it. I mean, you still get the message out, so there's still something there, but...
The nice thing was the cameraman was triggered by what I told about risk reduction because he didn't know. And we had a whole conversation 20 minutes after about it.
Yeah, well...
And he said, you know, you might not realize, but if you're on Al Jazeera, there are lots and lots of people who see this.
Oh, yeah.
So you had a few-minute interview, but it has a big impact around the world.
Well, you know the old saying, when you're faced with that kind of situation and you're in a room with nothing but a camera, you just keep calm and carry on.
I wanted to ask, if you're having an event, how early do you do a press release?
I would say that you give it a couple of weeks. Don't give it 2 months because they'll throw it away or they'll lose it in their futures file. I would say give it a couple of weeks and then count it down a bit. With a week to go, send a reminder. Day to go, send a reminder. Don't do any more than that because you're really wasting your time. That media outlet doesn't know what's going to happen coming down the pipe. They don't even know at the beginning of a broadcast day what they're going to wind up actually putting on the air, if it's television or even if it's newspapers as well. But these days, the top events are led by broadcast, not by print. Print follows up with a background kind of situation, but I still think the rule applies. A couple of weeks, then in a week, then it's coming up tomorrow. I think that would work most effectively with most outlets.
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
I've had interviews where the person interviewing has someone themselves with Alzheimer's, and of course it makes for better interaction and better discussion, better conversation, everything. But I had a very odd one this week where prior to the interview we sat and discussed, and the person told me, well, my mother has it and what,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to mention that in the interview at all, and it felt kind of uncomfortable because I'm bringing experiences of my mother and what has happened, and I know that he was able to or should have been able to contribute to the discussion in a better way, but it just felt uncomfortable for me. Yeah.
Well, in that case, I would have, talked my mouth off, and most journalists I know would have, because being able to identify with your interview subject is great. It's great for you. It's great for it makes for a better interview, a better conversation. People will listen. People will watch. The fact that he didn't want to mention it, I think, are two things. One, stigma. Number two, he or she, whoever the interviewer is, doesn't insert themselves into stories. And some journalists are like that. They will not tell you anything about their own lives. They're conducting the interview, and they've drawn a line. They've built a wall at anything personal. Well, I don't know why they did. I mean, what a useless thing to say, and then not to say he was going to talk about it. Oh, well.
Just a quick one.
Very loud.
Okay, thank you. It's not quite a question. It's just something I wanted to share and to see how you would have reacted.
Yeah.
I was invited to do a radio interview. They said it was going to be like a whole hour. It was during World Alzheimer's Month. So I had a whole hour with commercials in between.
Why, were you on the phone or were you in the studio?
No, in the studio. I was in the studio.
Okay.
And we had a number of questions, and then the journalist left the room. So I left the room and left me talking. And yes, he did. And he was gone for about 10 minutes. So, I had no questions. I just had to keep on going. And it was a bit of an awkward situation, and I hope I used the time well.
What a bonus. Did you have to throw the commercial at some point, or? Oh, so did he ever? But then he came back, and what did he say? Put the mic there, just so we can hear this.
When he came back, I gave him an odd stare, and he said, "Oh, you did wonderful, wonderful, very nice."
So he went in the other room so he could listen to you, I guess. Or went out for a cigarette or something. That tops it. I've never heard that before. That's great.
Dale, it reminds me of an interview I had in Morocco when we had a local conference. The interview was like this: "Oh, we're going to do an interview." It just gave me the microphone, and I had to talk. There were no questions at all. There was no subject. So I had to, I had to make my own story.
You'll get that. Now I hear so-and-so to talk about...
It was a TV.
To talk about dementia. Well, I mean, in a way, that's a godsend. I mean, you make up your own narrative, you know? Yeah, you'll get lazy journalists like that sometimes. Anyway. I've used,
Or you have some more additional?
No, I have no more. Let me see. No more.
I think it was very good that we planned this session, because you see what a response you get.
I'm going to repeat that story.
Yes. Okay. After this lively session, we have one more to go before lunch. And that's for me again, and now I need to remember what it was about. Yeah, so this came from a question from Raymond. What are the barriers to effectively implement dementia plans? So going from this morning, we talked a lot about what is in the WHO plan, what are the objectives, what are all the areas, but this is about how to make it happen, how to make it work. And that's the harder part, and I don't have the solutions, but I have a lot of tips from experience, and I need a bit of water, sorry. So what I want to talk about is basically two things, because we already did using the media. The knowledge and the data, what is available already and data from ADI and from other sources. And then if you want to make things happen, you need to have the funding as well. And that's an issue that touches everybody here as well. So I will do a sort of mini fundraising lecture as well. First of all, this is the most asked question in our world. And it hasn't changed. I'm 17 years now in the dementia movement. What is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? It's a question that journalists ask you. It's even a question that doctors can ask you. And I found this graph very nice. Dementia is an umbrella. It's the overall syndrome. And lots of types of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body, vascular, frontotemporal, etc. Now, the ADI reports, let's start with that. We have World Alzheimer reports since 2009, and they cover different topics that are all useful for policy. So every report that ADI publishes, we have in the back of our mind, is this useful for policy and for policymakers? That's why we do it. We don't want to do research for the research, but we do want to do it because we want to use it. Then the WHO ADI report from 2012, Dementia a Global Health Priority, is a very useful report with lots of information, lots of case stories as well. the prevalence and cost data, you already saw them several times. There's a report that we did in 2014, I believe, on 7 national plans. That has been used in the PAHO region as well. A nutrition report, nutrition and dementia. We have a template if you want to do your own country report. Women and dementia report, dementia-friendly communities. And then what we just launched the week before last in Geneva is, we haven't officially launched it actually, that needs to happen yet, is an overview of current national plans. We were asked by the Swiss government, can you do a kind of assessment of what are good plans, what works, what doesn't work. And so we looked at the 29 plans. We didn't get information about all of them. Sometimes it's only available in Korean language, and not many people outside Korea speak that. But there were 23 with useful information. But the most interesting finding is that governments do not monitor and evaluate their own plans. So they make the plan, they adopt it, it's approved, and then nobody is looking at what is the impact. One of the few exceptions was, again, Costa Rica. They're measuring every year how much they have done. So this report, for instance, is still useful. That's the benefits of early diagnosis and intervention. It was launched in 2011. It contains strong argument for early diagnosis and intervention.